Welcome to the first turn. I am Hyena,
I'm Llama.
and today we're talking about some Warhammer stuff. There's quite a bit actually to talk about.
Quite a bit.
I mean, it hasn't been like wow, crazy news, but there's some stuff in the works. There's some stuff moving
But
around.
there's some crazy
Um,
news. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
So I mean,
rumors.
there's a handful of things. A lot of rumor stuff. We've got some advanced information about 11th edition 40k that we'll talk about. We've got some time to digest it and let some of the shock wear off. I mean, I wasn't shocked by anything. I don't know if you were shocked by anything. The community in general was a little shocked by some things, and my response to that is, chill out. It's
Like
not that different.
a Vanguard veteran Space Marine.
Yeah.
They show
is a slightly more blinged up version of a jump pack intercessor, which is exactly what it should be. But it's got a crux terminatus on his shoulder to designate he's a veteran.
They're veterans, right?
He's got some extra, adornments. I think we went a little overboard back when with the jump pack Vanguard vets having a little too many things on them, and I think that's what people wanted. If you want that much, use a model from the Crusaders or something as a stand-in to make your assault intercessors or something.
Well,
the Crusader Brethren kit is that blinged up. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and what was
like
predictable
that.
And then interesting, I'll give both here,
yeah.
was as soon as the image comes up, whenever it's a Space Marine, people are going to outrage, and then they're going to jump on a meme. And that was one that it was like, oh, it's just an assault intercessor. And then it was just like we saw some rules, which we'll get to in a bit, about how they went from circles to rectangles. And they think because they've come up with that little phrase, that little sentiment, that's like the mic drop on the whole thing, and that's what they'll use forever and ever and ever. Now, as far as the Vanguard veteran model itself, well, for one, we only saw 1 out of the 5 that'll be in there. And in the starter set, it's going to be probably the monopose push fit kind, but it sounds like the majority of these kits for both Orcs and Space Marines will be released later, and they will be the multi-part variants, a la the 2 versions of the Tyranid Gaunts.
Or the Terminators, or
Space
Stern Guard
Terminators,
veterans.
Right? They come in the starter box, they're monopose, they have limited stuff, and then you get the box later and it's packed full of goodies. Now, they don't do that for every kit, but a lot of the baseline infantry kits they do. And Space Marines, of course, if any of you Space Marine players don't have infinite bits to which you can bling up your veteran models, then I don't believe that you play Space Marines at all. Like, it's just... First of all, it looked fine. It was exactly what they said the new armor style was going to look like, where they were blending the size of the Primaris and some of the nicer things like the knee pad, whatever, but they're showing weapons and helmets and stuff that match any armor pattern. So we saw that, and it was fine. He was wielding a power sword.
And he had a plasma pistol.
And a plasma pistol. So now already weapons that a baseline assault intercessor doesn't have, outside of the sergeant, who is a veteran typically, and then a couple of adornments. You're right. Otherwise, it was a little plain, but that's not bad. And the reason I say that is I think design-wise for models, they being Games Workshop, went through a phase where the models had too much bling and too much atmosphere and too many things packed in a way that was hard to modify.
Well, also, if you think about a unit of 10 guys, you've got 2 groups of 5 of the same models. If they have so much detail that's sculpted into them that you can't make them look unique across 10 models, that's going to be a problem. Like, people will complain about that too. It's like, oh, great, so I've got these 10 models, and I can literally clearly see there's 2 of the exact same one in every unit. Right. Because they're monopose, and I couldn't change them because they're sculpted where they've got this extra detail, but it's blended into his helmet, so I can't separate that kind of thing. It's like, I like the idea of erring on the side of not enough special stuff, and then you can add it yourself. You can add it with a paint job, you can add it with bits, you can add it with upgrade sprues, you can add it with Horus Heresy bits, like whatever. Well, I'd like to let it up to the modeler and the hobbyist more than I do to the game player. Because why do game players now all of a sudden care how much detail is on their models? I know so many players who just want to get their armies done as quickly as possible, and they don't like the painting and assembly side of things. But now you want to have more work to do? Like, pick a lane, man.
Yeah,
You know?
and so that was the predictable part, was their response. The interesting part was I made the mistake of engaging in the discussion with some of them. But it was interesting because when I pointed out that very thing where it's like, well, I think I would rather start with a slightly blank canvas that leaves it up to me as the hobbyist to decide, A, what flavor of Space Marines I want them to be in this case. Whereas if they had molded on a blood droplet or, whatever, all of a sudden now I have to carve it and change it. But I'd rather have a slightly blank canvas for which to paint on, and then to put my own little trinkets on if I want to make them a special veteran decorated unit. And when I had this discussion with people, it was surprising how many of them went like, yeah, that is better.
Yeah.
They were like, and you never see that. Like, it wasn't that their mind was changed. It's that, well, no, it is better this way. And then you'd kind of get this smirk out of them and you'd have to fish for it a bit, but you'd realize but they wanted to be a part of the group that's complaining, because that's the easiest movement to be a part of. It's not hard to complain about Games Workshop. It's not hard to hate them. It's not controversial to hate them. So it's like easier to just jump on what everybody's saying and stick to it. And that was like what was happening with we replaced circles with rectangles. And so they think it's a dumb thing.
It's the same thing. Like, that's another thing, right? So they said no more circles. To me, that means like you're always going to have ranges to things. There's always going to be circles in the game because my model's on a round base. If I'm measuring a distance from that model, it's going to make a circle around my model with a round circle base. Circles are going to exist. What they meant by that was in terms of objectives, there won't be little circles on the map that are a point you have to control. Which, okay, what do you do to control objectives now? Well, objectives are now going to be nestled basically inside of a piece of terrain. It's gonna be built into a terrain piece. So now it's like, what's your objective? Control a terrain piece. We've got these maps that evenly distribute these terrain pieces.
They showed what
therefore
maps look like.
It's pretty balanced trying to control these objectives because we've kind of put them where they need to be. We've given you base sizes for these terrain pieces, which also we'll talk about this too. They clean that up a little bit. But how many times did you see games where it was, okay, well, this objective is between these two ruins. Well, I've got an infantry unit standing right behind this wall on the ground floor, can't be seen inside of the ruins, but still towing the line of the objective.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so in order for you to control that objective, you're inside of the building hiding, but still in range of it. You're just controlling that building. Like maybe that building is the only spot that you can be in cover while also controlling that objective. It's like that is essentially the same thing there. You know what I mean? Like, so in most cases, I think the gameplay itself will be no different. Right? Like okay, so you need to tow into a terrain's footprint now instead of the area, the terrain's area, which is new terms they've defined for what terrain looks like. But they'll generally be in the same spot. You'll still use control score. You'll still do. It's gonna be almost no different, honestly.
And players are still gonna find those cheeky ways to get infantry units that can touch and hold it, but they're like hidden somewhere. But I will say, I'll be interested to see how they follow through with part of it. One, by defining the area or footprint of terrain on 2 dimensions, which if that's how it's going to play out in full, that's massively different and something we've talked about for a long time. But that whole area has kind of like a rule in it now where it's like what can shoot in and what can shoot out. And now it almost seems like, and you can correct me if they've said something else, that the physical terrain itself won't matter. A lot of it's going to be based on the area. So like one thing people were talking about is visually what they didn't like seeing is they show up to tournaments and you see a bunch of foam L's everywhere. And then it was like, we want to see buildings that look good again and whatever. It's like, well, GW always sold buildings for one that you could buy. They were just outrageous. 2, I think less people were into terrain because you had MDF and printers. And so, but I do think they want to still encourage that part of the hobby. It is immersive when you see a cool looking, cathedral or something that's in ruins and like but I don't think the physical size and shape of the building is going to matter as much as what the footprint or area is.
I agree with that. because you can fit whatever terrain you want to into that terrain area and have all kinds of different configurations, but still have the basic same footprint.
Yeah.
I think it will affect a little bit of line of sight stuff based on what you do put in it.
Have
Especially
they
if
gone
there's, like,
over yet how line of
if
sight
there's
works?
elevations. So they've defined like how the footprint interacts with line of sight, but being like up in a building does give you better line of sight over certain things. Because
Okay.
not every, I think not every piece of terrain is straight up obscuring, which obscuring prevents you from seeing past it. I think there is still an element of true line of sight too. Like
Okay.
if a unit is on this
Yeah.
area of terrain, but there's a like the building, the ruined piece you have in that area of terrain is also a solid wall, you still can't see that unit. Regardless of like whether they're in that area of terrain or not, you still need to be able to see it. And so if it's kind of a 2-inch thing and they're behind it, if you're on ground floor, you can't see that unit, even though they're in the terrain. But if you're up on the 3rd floor, 5 inches up, and you can see down over that wall that's in the area terrain, you should be able to draw a line of sight to that unit. So there will still be some cases where being up, getting a better vantage point will still make a difference. But in terms of just like everything fighting on the floor, I think it's going to be a much cleaner experience.
Yeah.
So,
I
but
mean,
then you can have more interesting things on the battlefield, not just like you said, all of these L-shaped buildings, ruins, a single L shape, all, it's like someone took a big knife and they cut every building this way in the same
Yep.
direction, and your whole board is filled with this half with a cut this direction, and this whole board this way is cut that way. It looks all so samey. Like we had to do it for tournaments to make them fair and balanced. Is everyone's given 5-6 pieces of terrain on their side of the board, and they're exactly the same as the other side, and they're symmetrical. Like there's no advantage to it.
Yep.
Like I get it. This I think will take away some of that, risk of disadvantage from having your side of the board not set up exactly the same as your opponent's side. It could be a little bit more interesting, a little bit more visually interesting, but less impact on the game. If all the silhouettes and the areas are in the exact same spot on the table, you set it up that way, maybe
Yeah.
that takes some of that edge off.
Well, and that's what it looks like in the little maps they did show us, or battle plans, or whatever they call them.
Right.
It does look like they're still encouraging symmetrical footprints.
Yep.
So I imagine what the actual terrain piece is could vary, though.
I think there was a sort of a community rule, if not an official rule, during the peak, call it, of Star Wars Legion, where there were guidelines for setting up terrain, and tournament organizers were suggested to create. You should have one firing lane, at least 2 firing lanes, clear firing lanes, at least one area where things can be obscured from all directions. You can hide 1 large piece, 4 pieces of scatter. Like it was that kind of recommendation for every table, so that there's a little bit of everything. It wasn't a well, this board's all craters. Good luck, tanks.
Right.
You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yep.
And so I wonder if they're trying to do that too, because I did see in one of the maps they had sort of like it was like a ruin here, and then there was like a bridge in between that was a barricade, but all of it was obscuring. So it means if you were in that horseshoe of terrain features, I think you were invisible to the enemy. Like you couldn't be seen. And so maybe there will be encouraged to have a few places where like literally you can hide units, some places where there are firing lanes, and the area where you're completely obscured isn't going to be big enough to put your whole army in, obviously. Right. So like you got to pick and choose what unit you care about most and needs to go hide in that. What unit is stealthy and doesn't need to be in there that can go be in a forward objective, kind of thing. I don't know. I think it's I think they put more thought into it this time, and I hope it turns out better, because terrain and line of sight has always been one of the weakest parts of the game in almost every edition, I think.
It's also been that combined with objectives. We're always so exploitable too. Like, yeah, you had editions of the game that were just list hammer, as they were dubbed, because you just built a list that could leaf blower the opponent's side of the board, and then you didn't have to worry about objectives. but they've shifted the game so that no matter the lethality, objectives are more important. And so then you had the like situations like you described earlier, where someone's got a single model hidden in a piece of terrain and they're just toe in that circle, and so they're claiming it, and it's super hard to get them off of there because you have to find them when they're hidden. And but then you also had other ones where, well, I can't attack that infantry unit that's on top of that piece of terrain with my giant flying thing or my giant walker.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was like, if there was more than a half an inch somewhere, people were literally doing stuff like hanging their model upside down from the roof so that the base was on the roof and it was perfectly tournament legal. I don't know. So I think all of this stuff was always super exploitable. And it just seems like every edition, Games Workshop's idea to fix terrain and line of sight and objective is to add more words. So I don't know.
But this to me seemed like they were defining their ideas more than like making it more complicated. I thought it seemed cleaner, honestly.
I think
the examples they gave were better than what they normally do. Like they very explicitly explained the examples, and I think it seems very clean to me. It seems a lot more clear. It's very similar without, completely changing how everything works. We still know what obscuring is. We still know what cover is. We still know what wholly within is. We know all these terms. And so I don't know. It did seem better. I think there is room for exploitation. Maybe they'll need some FAQs to clarify some things. Yeah, I definitely do. Someone's going to come up with something to see a hole in an official layout and be like, oh well, this is a problem. Yeah, I think that's going to happen. Well, we didn't expect to run into an issue with a character who's also a war machine instead of just being a monster. Like, that never happened before. A warrior, a character beast unit can do weird things in this rule set and interact with terrain in weird ways because there's exactly one character beast in the entire game. That kind of thing. One-offs. I could see that. Oh, this Titanic unit has stealth, but Titanic units can't get stealth. Weird stuff like that. I'm hoping also that's another thing they kind of correct, is the fact that like Titanic units, big, tall, mechanized or whatever units, have plunging fire. They count as being up high to give you like an advantage on your ballistic skills when you're shooting at small things. I'm hoping then that means that they've tried to fix how Titanic units interacting with tall buildings work too. If you count as being a tall building and you're interacting with another unit that's on a tall building, you should be able to fight them at the top of that building. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and really, if you think about the logistics of it, that poor infantry unit on the third floor is at a disavantage now, because where do they go when that thing starts running?
You're going to hit the floor. You're going to hit the carapace of the knight. What's that going to do? You've got your chain sword, and you're going to try to hit it, in like the muzzle of its heavy stubber.
Right.
Like, what can you reach out of that window? And meanwhile, it walks by and it looks straight into your soul because it's at window height, and it's got a chain sword, ready to go. That's 4 car lengths.
Yep.
So yeah,
goes to the building. Yeah, hopefully, and we haven't seen enough to know, but hopefully they do address that a little bit, because I think you are on to something when you say that, at least by defining the terrain as area 2-dimensionally, that is cleaner, and then how the units interact with it seem cleaner. I think the less interaction styles you create in a game, or rather the more you trim, like the cleaner the game will be. Because then if you have too many ways to interact, you end up with too many confusing situations, right? Just like you described, or like we were talking about, magic boxes and toe-in wins, and there were even, or units suddenly have an awkward rule and they can't move through something, but something that shouldn't is allowed to, and I don't know.
Vehicles that are characters getting bodyguard rule, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So hopefully, I don't know. It looks like not a lot is changing. It's still going to feel unmistakably like 40K. I think that's something they've always managed to keep consistent. But it looks like something is now a part of list creation, right? Whereas before it was something you decided after that.
Yeah, so that was another big thing about characters was like inconsistencies, right? Like we were talking about Titus's unit compared to Huron's unit and the way they're able to interact with leading a unit and how one is basically the same exact makeup as the other, but one can lead a unit and the other one can't, kind of, or whatever. Inconsistencies. Maybe that's not the case, but like as an example, like that could be the case. They have come up with rules like that before. And so what I'd like to see is more consistency in the game across multiple armies. And one of the things I think we're seeing here is with characters getting designated as different keywords, you can, as a rules balancing person, make a unit more or less useful by giving it different keywords, right? Like maybe we don't have every character be able to be taken solo because some characters have weird rules that when solo are kind of busted, right? Like there's a lieutenant for Space Marines, the one in the Phobos armor. He is a great character to have by himself because he's got stealth. You can't target him outside of a certain distance. You get too close to him, he can get to move. He isn't used for anything except for getting objectives, basically.
Yep. Like a 90-point objective snagger.
But when Leviathan came out, there was a Biologus model, the
apothecary, right? Yeah.
He didn't have a unit that he could join. Like that box didn't have a unit that was on his list of units that can be joined right out of that starter box. So what was he good for if you played with just the two sides versus each other? Nothing. He couldn't do anything by himself because all of his rules required him to be attached to a unit. Oh, well, you can bring models back to life. You get bonus objective control if your unit killed another unit. Like all these things. It's like, he's not doing that by himself ever. And so it was a little weird. So the change they are making is saying there are some characters that are heroes, right? Call them that. Heroes can either lead a unit as a commander, or they can go off and do their own thing by themselves as a standalone hero, right? But then there are some support characters, and support characters are upgrades to units that have to be taken
They're always as a part of a unit,
a unit attachment, right? So you might have an apothecary, you might have a some kind of like maybe they'll make sergeants support characters now. So you can choose to take 5 assault marines, or maybe you can take 5 assault marines, add a sergeant to it as an upgrade. That then gives some kind of a bonus, a buff to that unit for having your sergeant. I could see that. I mean, any kind of like non-captain level character could just be a support hero. They can't run by themselves. You don't get to take your lieutenants. You don't get to take your librarians. They're all support characters. You attach them to a unit.
If you remember back in the day, they did an edition 3.5 of 40k. When 3rd edition launched, it was very different from 2nd, and all the codexes were just coming out and they were like pamphlets. People didn't like it. They wanted their big chunky codexes back. I don't know why, but so here came 3.5. And the Chaos Space Marines Codex that came out dominated the entire meta until we got 4th edition. But one of the things that all their units had, their infantry squads, were just kind of what you're describing. It was like you could take the squad as they were, and then you could pay points to upgrade one of them to an aspiring champion.
Yeah.
And then they had special rules based on which mark you were choosing. So like the Khorne one got Red Thirst or Red Rage or whatever they called the Khorne version, not the Blood Angels one. And then they could buy War Gear and so on.
There was also an edition where you could characters could challenge one another and duke it out. And the rest of the unit would just stand by and watch while they duked it out. That kind of thing. So it mattered that a unit had an aspiring champion because he was better at that. He could protect his unit by him either winning a fight or losing a fight and only him dying and the unit surviving, that kind of thing.
So I could see them doing something similar like you just described, where it's like, well, you can get 5 intercessors and you can pay to upgrade one to a sergeant, and now he's got this other rule. Or it'll be you can pay to add an apothecary, but you don't just buy an apothecary separate,
right,
and run him around.
And that clears up like when you have a character and then like a list of this unit can join these units.
Right.
Well, now it'll be, here's the unit. You can add one of these support characters to this unit as
Yeah,
like
I think
an
it'll
extra
free up.
points.
It'll free up slots. It'll.
Right. That's another thing with like list building and rules of 3 and all that. If it's an upgrade, it's not technically a unit you're adding to the army.
Yeah.
But
I think it'll also mean
in
there's fewer of those super cheap standalone solo characters that score a bunch of
Correct.
points. Right.
But they still could be out there. I mean, you still have them, but they're going to be limited to which units can actually do it, and they'll balance it around that, points them appropriately around that. So the other thing that changed is that the two different character types are in different categories. So every unit can have one of each. So you buy your upgrade for a support hero, essentially, and then you can attach a captain to them, a leader unit to them. So before you had to kind of choose, right? So it's like, well, I really like to have this apothecary biologist, but I also like this Terminator captain. Oh, I got to pick one or the other. I can't do both. Now they started coming out with rules where it's like, oh, if you include a captain, you can also include this other character. You could, oh, if you got a captain, you can also attach a lieutenant, or you know, whatever. But now it's like you extrapolate on that. Every army didn't have that possibility. Sure, you could add an Archon to your unit, but could you also add a Succubus to a Dark Elf unit?
Right.
Now maybe you can. Maybe a Succubus is an upgrade, support character, but an Archon now is a leader. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Make it even across all the armies.
Well, and so it's essentially saying one of those types of characters that can stand alone or attach can attach to basically any unit, whether they've had an upgraded hero within or not. It's like, so they're kind of two different things, but yeah, I do like that. And as long as every army gets something like that, I also think that's why it was like, now we're seeing them release multiple versions of the Tyranid Prime. And now, so I think they're going to make more of these types of heroes that can either integrate or attach. Maybe.
Interesting. At
least it's something like that in Age of Sigmar.
I wish they would, because I mean they're pussyfooting around. Is that their thing? They're tiptoeing around, basically creating integrated heroes to units without actually doing it. Right? There's all these auras. You have to be within combat range of your unit when the thing happens. You gotta, if you're outside of this range, you can't target this unit. They're completely hidden to shooting attacks. If you're in range of this character with this unit, both units have a 5-up ward. You can pass off damage. You can. All these rules are basically getting around the fact that like a character should just be a part of a unit. If you want to protect a hero, like just make them part of the unit. They can then pass off their buff. Oh, this hero, if it fights, it can choose a unit nearby, and then that unit can fight immediately after this hero fights. It's like, so they fight together, is what you're saying. They're one unit fighting together. Oh, okay. You know what I mean?
And before we get into Age of Sigmar stuff, we'll wrap up the 40k rumors and some of the rules leaks we've seen. One thing that has happened is the narrative of what's going on in the 40k universe is there's a lot of open doors. There's some confusion, and it's because of a few things. One, we have information on very recent Horus Heresy era books that were written that kind of set up or changed narratives in the 40k universe. Now we've started the Scouring series. I've just read that first book, Ashes of the Imperium or whatever, and like, that seems to set up or change things in the 41st millennium. Now we have these 4 campaigns coming to the end of this edition that have changed things in the 40k universe now and may affect them in 11th edition. And then, of course, we have lots of rumors about stuff happening narratively in 11th edition, including who the major players are going to be at Armageddon, which I think we'll find out before 11th, how the Space Wolves and the Orcs combined have kept Yarick alive. And then, of course, we've seen on the website officially, Perturabo is
artwork
carrying out his 10,000-year plan, which I believe starts during the Scouring. And without spoiling, I can just say the little bits of screen time he gets in that first book, it like kind of sets up him going on some grand plan because he trusts nobody. Now we have canon artwork for Demon Primarch Perturabo, like GW officially licensed artwork. And while it's a sketch, it was a very quick piece of artwork to just kind of show a silhouette of him as this massive demon engine-y character. So his whatever his armor was called, Armor of Olympia or something like that. That suit is clearly morphed into something more. He underneath it is morphed into something more. And in typical GW fashion, it's grandiose, right? He's huge on the battlefield. So that's cool. I have to imagine they've it's either based on a design for a model they've got, or it is showing us what the design for the model might be, but it's still a ways off. Kind of like the Steel Legion stuff, right? So who knows? It could be they had story planned, but weren't going to release a model. Now they saw the fan like fare is so hot for Give Us Perturabo that now they're like, okay, we got to make him now. But I do wonder what the fastest that turnaround could be if that's what they did. But yeah, we've seen some of that. But the bigger rumors are, well, what does this mean for the loyalist side, if anything? What Primarchs might be coming back? Now, when you hear Perturabo, I'll say my thoughts and then let you. Everyone, of course, thinks Rogel Dorn because
Rogel Dorn. Yeah,
you have
two sides of the same coin.
The Siege Master versus the Defender, right? And they had an epic battle at the Siege of Terra that Dorn kind of won, but really Perturabo just quit when he saw what Horus was up to. Kind of spoiler.
Hey, if your opponent concedes, you still count as winning.
Still count as winning, right? I mean, Dorn held out. He did, and he even set some pretty cool traps that they didn't foresee. But then, of course, there was like the Iron Cage, which we're going to get more information about when it's going to be a part of the Scouring series of novels, where they go more in depth into that. And that was like a rematch where, from the sounds of it, the Iron Warriors essentially embarrassed the Imperial Fist. Like it started out well for the Imperial Fist, but then something changed, and then so Perturabo gets a victory, right? And then Dorn goes missing on a routine boarding action somewhere, which is a lot of people call bullshit. That's pretty hard to have a Primarch go lost on a boarding action. So people immediately say, if we're getting Perturabo, that means we're getting Dorn. Now, would that be fitting? Would it check some boxes and people be satisfied? Yep. I don't know if that's who we're getting, though. And the reason I think that is, well, we can't always use their past actions as precedent. We have seen that in 40K, they, being Games Workshop, is trying to set up some different rivalries than the Horus Heritage. They want it to feel different. This is a different time. When Guilliman woke up, he didn't immediately be like, where's Lorgar? Like, he woke up and then like analyzed his star system, or where he was, what time he was in, star system, etc. Boom. And his first plans were, okay, well, the Tyranids over here, whatever this race is a problem. And then he had fights with Mortarion and Magnus, who he'd never had rivalries with before, and then is also learning to deal with Necrons. Like, the Primarchs are incredibly intelligent and adaptable beings whose powers change or even grow over time, the longer they're alive, which one of many reasons they're so dangerous. But like, so that was entirely new. The Lion wakes up, and you find out he's got this ability to literally dimension door to anywhere in the galaxy with this forest walk thing. And what does he do? He fights Angron, who he had no rivalry with. So I don't think that if, Dorn comes out, it means he has to be, or Perturabo comes out, that it has to be Dorn who fights him. Yes, I would absolutely see it if they did it. It'd be easy. But Perturabo's, I think, got a whole new set of problems he's got to figure out. His Iron Warriors Legion's not big enough to conquer a galaxy, and he needs help, for one. And I don't think he's going to get it from Abaddon. One, Abaddon hates all the Primarchs and only moves when the Chaos Gods tell the Primarchs they have to follow him. So I don't think he's going to help him. Huron is Huron and is going to be like, oh, I'll let you pass through my area if you give me Blackstone and I get to steal a quarter of your legion for my pirates. Like, they're demons. Perturabo's not a big fan of them. He does have Vastro the Archifane and the Dark Mechanicum. So that could be something, but I think he's going to need outside help. He might not find it, and then there could end up a wild card, something he doesn't predict, which is weird because that's what Perturabo does, is he tries to calculate every possibility. But like, there's someone who's always been the antithesis of that, and it even worked at the Siege of Terra, and that is Chagatai Khan. The War Crow, the Primarch of the White Scars, has always been considered unpredictable by his brothers. He's the one guy that they can't anticipate. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't reveal his style of war, and so it makes him a dangerous opponent.
See, I love that idea. Because he's another character that people really aren't talking about. I mean, we're getting a fast attack edition of 11th, right? Lots of jump packs, getting potentially new bikes, new
Outriders, yeah.
speeders, and stuff like that. Like, White Scars love all that. I think that'd be awesome if White Scars came back in that fashion. Because like I was expecting, I had other things in mind before him of like could be coming back as the next Primarch, but I love that idea. I mean, because we've got other characters that,
I mean,
again,
I just think
they're trying sense.
Yeah, I just think they're trying to create new rivalries because we're in a different edition, and Primarchs change with the times. They don't always stay the same. And so now my money is on they'll bring Dorn back because it's too easy. Because they could do a whole thing on their website. Whose side are you on? The Lord of Iron or the Praetorian, and everyone will do a thing.
Well, we've also got Armageddon, right? Armageddon is a setting, and like there are at least one Primarch tied to Armageddon too.
Yep.
Another
like people aren't talking about.
And so I mean, I wouldn't see it relating to Perturabo in any way, because I don't think Perturabo's going to Armageddon to go tussle with the orcs. It's not his plan, but I could absolutely see, Vulcan showing up in Armageddon. That's where he was seen last.
Yep. Or as far as we know, that was the last place he was seen. We know he doesn't die.
Mm-hmm.
We know because Magnus even had an instance where in like a little playground warp realm, he atomized Vulcan. Vulcan still came back. So he's alive somewhere. Unless he's been hit with an Anathem blade and a psychic bolt, the power of the Emperor can only deliver, like he did to Horus. We know Vulcan came back. So the last place he was seen was around Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
And Vulcan is one who, no matter which legion is yours, everybody loves Vulcan. It's like he's just like the coolest guy, but then he's also terrifying when he's at his worst. So I don't know. And he is also a master builder, a master artisan. He's going to build something up, and Perturabo's goal is to come knock it down. Those two never had a rivalry. So that could even be a thing. Again, I'll say for the third time, it's probably Dorn to match Perturabo because why not? But I could absolutely see them creating another new rivalry for the new edition. I mean, when you think about it narratively, they're actually in a tough spot with 40K, because you'd think, well, if they're writing all new, they can just make it up. It's like, yeah, but they're taking a setting that was static for so long and trying to add to it now. And that's hard because you have fans who've always thought of the 40K universe in this box. Those people like we used to know, who'd been around 25, 30 years in the hobby, and they hate everything new and love everything old. And you have people still working in the studio who remember the old Edge of Midnight story. And now you're trying to progress the story forward. It's hard to do it and do it well. And so I think writing new rivalries is a good opportunity for them. And you just have things that are different now. There were no Necron worlds waking up during the Horus Heresy. Tau didn't even exist yet. The Tyranids were galaxies away. Like the Orc log wasn't nearly this big. So all of this stuff is new now and is very different. And to a Primarch who's been a demon prince living in the warp, he doesn't know how much time's passed at all, and then comes out and it's like, oh, this is a little different than what my acolyte told me. And then the loyalists, it's the same thing. They're gone for millennia, and then they come back to a very different looking.
Well, especially if you're tucked away somewhere, fighting in the warp. I mean, you've got a couple of Primarchs that are potentially warp doorsteps. You've got at least one in the webway. You've got one who's maybe in stasis, being held prisoner. You've got guys who were on are almost dead, like Gilliman, who's just been asleep for 10,000 years. Every Primarch has kind of been removed as a player in some way, and hasn't had an impact on the galaxy in a direct, meaningful way, or maybe isn't even up to current events. You would think they could get up to speed, or they would. It's a little too convenient that 10,000 years after the setting, after it was that none of them impacted it, and they all came back within the same 100-year window. That's a little weird, but that's why they're moving it forward a little bit at a time, and then a new one comes out, and 50 more years, and another one. Oh, no, we're moving 100 years. that's another one, that kind of thing.
I still think they want to have Gilliman and the Lion meet before they introduce the next one.
Mhm.
And the next Loyalist anyway. The Chaos ones, they could just release them all the time over and over again. I think it'd be fine. But because they were players in the lore in the between years, it's just the lore never moved. So it was the same story over and over again.
Right.
Like nothing new came out. And with the Loyalist, it's like you brought Gilliman back and he had an impact. That was the Gathering Storm, the Indominus Crusade, the construction of these extra Space Marine chapters. And the Lion came back though and he fought a fight. And that's it. And so there's like problems he's got to solve. They now confirmed on the Warcom site that he reached out to Gilliman and said, we need to talk. But now have that talk. What does that look like? What does that do for the story? They need an event together, not just their back, and then don't write about them ever. Because that's how people felt the last edition sort of went, where it was like, you have this big change in the way the Tyranids are invading. So we're going to launch an edition based on that and have no stories that cover what took place as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lion was kind of a part of that in the previous year. He comes back and he fights this fight with Angron, and then now what? So I think we saw that in Age of Sigmar too. It's like here's this chamber of the Stormcast who realized.
Oh, guess what? The Skaven city erupted from the ground. Okay, and then what? Nothing.
Yeah, no follow up. We don't find out where. And so I think they're trying to. They're doing so much more now on both the Black Library side and the tabletop game side that they're trying to give us those stories now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think these campaigns to end an edition is a neat way to do it. Also, give us some payoffs, give us some new stories to look forward to. It's like they're trying to make the end of each edition feel like WrestleMania. Like it's all the stories you've spent all year working on, get this big payoff at this event. And then you start the next year with some things carrying over, but otherwise whole new programs, right? If anyone who watches Professor Wrestling, But I think they're kind of doing that. And we've heard rumors that they may be doing that for Age of Sigmar as well, whose edition is scheduled to end next year.
So that one's a little bit more contentious because big things changing are kind of scary out of context.
Yep.
Right? Like with 40K, I mean, like a time jump forward for, it kind of works a little better, right? 100 years, no big deal. We're talking about 10,000 years as like a setting.
Right.
You're in a galaxy, a small change that can happen isn't going to affect. There's two places that are unaffected and are normal, right? Like the galaxy cracks in half, but like if you're nowhere near the crack, the things really change for you. Yeah, like that kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas like out of context, these Age of Sigmar rumors are pretty large and they're kind of scary because they're huge and sweeping, and I guess we kind of have to address it and coming from a place of like, well, we're not really sure any of this is accurate or any of this is valid, or if it's, like 40K has haters, right? But it's not like there's another thing that is similar to 40K that people are on board with as like a rivalry.
Right.
Age of Sigmar itself, its conception was largely a death of another game that brought it into being. Yep. Because while you could call it a sequel, it's a spiritual sequel. It's it's something that comes after, but it's not in any way related in terms of like rules and concepts carrying over and setting carrying over, like none of that. So when fantasy went away, call it that in the nicest way possible. When fantasy went away for a while, Age of Sigmar took its place. It was different. It was rank and file anymore. It was very different. People who were into fantasy held a grudge that not necessarily that Games Workshop got rid of fantasy, but that this new game took my fantasy away. It was a very weird way of framing it. It was blaming the new game for your game going away instead of blaming the company for mismanaging their game and not
or blaming the community for not supporting, offering feedback to the game, like nothing.
All of the above, right? It was a failure in many different ways.
Yep.
The support wasn't there. The communication wasn't there. The community building wasn't there. Like the rules were stagnant. Like there's a lot of things that went into fantasy going away, and I can't really get into all of it. But Age of Sigmar as a standalone game has been successful, especially after I would say second edition launched,
Yep.
and they got away with a lot of the goofy. They brought in more of the serious. There were tournament packs. There were balancing. There was points. There was ways to play pickup games and match play games. However, with if you take any of the edition change settings and you lay them out without context, none of them sound that scary, right? Oh, ghosts are going to be coming out of everywhere. Skaven erupt and crash into the mortal realms, and they appear. Oh, big, destruction wog is coming. Kragnos, the end of empires, is coming to break cities. Whatever. Okay, fine. These current rumors, though, are big, very, very big changes, and I think in a little bit of a PTSD sort of way, they're triggering people with what happened in End Times, right? I think looking back with the End Times of Warhammer Fantasy, people didn't see how the state of the game was, and they thought this game was perfectly healthy. Why are they doing these End Times and getting rid of it? It wasn't healthy. Age of Sigmar is in a healthy spot. There's constant growth. There's constant new things coming out. People from players to hobbyists and even people who don't play the game and aren't Games Workshop fans concede, yeah, these are some of the best models. These are some of the best releases. They're the most interesting. You're doing more things with this game than any other ones. So doing an event that was similar, reminds people of the End Times,
right,
is scary. It's like, why are they doing this?
Yeah, and PTSD might be the right way to describe it, because, well, to add on what you said first, then if you go into numbers, it's hard to get specifics, but what they do know is that Warhammer Age of Sigmar and BattleTech trade back and forth as the number 2 and number 3 tabletop games by player turnout, by sales, etc. Right behind, of course, Warhammer 40k. That's huge. Fantasy didn't sit in a spot in that top 3 for like over 10 years straight. It had fallen off of most lists. You'd get magazines and they would do their top and it would just never be there. And we saw at the tournaments during its last edition, that 8th edition push, which we talked about last week. They did release a lot of stuff. They did release cheap models. They pushed a lot of books out early. But I remember going to Adepticon that year where they used to hold the World Championship of Warhammer Fantasy. And you go into the ballroom, and this was at the Westin Lombard, and they had like 12 rows of tables, and it was like 3 or 4 tables wide. A lot of tables set up. Only the first 3 rows had players. The rest of it was just empty.
Yeah.
The game didn't have the player base anymore. You had people who moved on to other things. I think the generic medieval fantasy as an aesthetic had fallen out for a while, and we talked about that with the Lord of the Rings bubble. But anyway, the whole point is to say that Warhammer Fantasy was itself dying in community and popularity. They had Games Workshop couldn't figure out what direction to take it. They had models that were too old mixed with models that were new, mixed with what the hell are you doing? Pick an era. And it was financially in the red. Like, that was the other thing. It was losing them money. Their can of Chaos Black Primer was outselling the entire game. And so they're like, we have to dump it. It was it was a hard Band-Aid to rip because it was one of their identities. But they were like, we need to right the ship. So that was one of the cuts. They went back to opening up social media, interacting with fans, keeping updates with rules and all of that stuff. Sure, faster rules releases. But that was a big decision they had to make, was cutting the game. And so that's where the End Times came from. But when you consider how soon after Age of Sigmar launched, they already had to have this thing cooking. So that begs the question as to if one actually cannibalized the other, which is, I think, the mistaken idea a lot of fans have, is that this game came out and ate their perfectly healthy game. And it was just some stupid cash grab, and they wanted to make Space Marines in fantasy or whatever other thing you've heard. And so now there is this sentiment that, well, is Age of Sigmar dying? Is it struggling? And it's like, not only is it not, because as we said, it's in that second or third spot perpetually, it's profiting them a huge number. Now, where those numbers come from, I don't know, but it's in the neighborhood of hundreds of millions of British pounds that it's profiting, not just grossing in revenue, profiting. So the game is a commercial success. They don't want to kill a commercial success. The models are, like you just noted, considered by many people, even high-end artsy sculptors, some of the best possible, some of the best available. Painters and hobbyists love them. And now that more of the armies are becoming up to date and Age of Sigmar specific, you're seeing more people get in because now you get all these shiny new plastics that look great. Spearhead, of course, has been a huge success. That's another one.
Really easy way to get into the game and play a small scale version of it.
And so
self-contained rules and balance.
So with all of that, it's like with all the success, what would they really need to change? And I guess you could say the setting itself hasn't grabbed as many people. Now, Warhammer Fantasy, I don't believe it had this rich setting with awesome history and character development and growth. It didn't. It was Earth, not Earth, and bad Tolkien, and I've said that numerous times, but there's no story in Warhammer Fantasy setting that comes off as very original at all. Short of maybe like Cetra, but
yeah, I was going to say, I think Cetra and Nagash and like the Tomb King world, I think was probably the more interesting. But again, it's very Egypt.
Yeah,
lots of like, look at the Mummy.
Yeah,
as a movie franchise, a lot of that going on there is just.
Yep.
It's Tomb Kings.
And so, but it was like the Age of Sigmar lore, like when we read it, it was super interesting because it was a wholly original setting for them. Now they used, the planes of magic that carried over and all that sort of stuff, but like they were developing it more and more. They had some missed opportunities to dive in when the realms themselves were a part of the rules, instead of leaning into that and kind of forcing, if that's the right term, players to learn the setting and the realms. They just sort of abandoned it. And so these outlandish rumors going around not only suggest big, scary changes akin to an end times, despite the success of the game, but it sounds like it's wrapped around that, trying to frame the world in a way that makes its IP and its imagery more ingrained into the mainstream. I mean, the game's been out now 10 years, over 10 years. And so, but the setting hasn't been that grabbed onto, and you still have those grudge bearers. I mean, no dwarf puns intended. These people who hate AOS because they think it destroyed their game, or because they played first edition and didn't like how a double turn felt, or whatever the reason is, they've held on.
I will say, or because Total War was their introduction to it, and they want to get into fantasy now, and fantasy is already gone, even though Total War has just introduced them to it.
Yep.
There is no more game to like get into. The old world, yes, is filling a niche of that, but old world is not fantasy, right? It's not it's not the same thing. It will never be as big as fantasy was at its peak. And
I don't think it will, no.
Like it's a thing that people wanted for a long time that they finally gave into. Because if people are clamoring to give you money, why not come up with a solution to fulfill that? You know what I mean? But yeah, but the idea of like post fantasy death introduction, people being upset that Age of Sigmar killed fantasy before they even got into fantasy is like just an insane circular, like logical hatred. And I think some of that is, when people go look up, well, what happened to fantasy, and they hear the stories of like, oh, well, this game killed it. That's what they know. That's the history that they know from our world, of what happened to it. And it's just a little like, perpetuating almost like the lie becomes the truth, because we're in this weird psychosis of like alternate, like history of like, here's what happened, but it didn't.
Well, and then the grudge feels similar to when you'll hear people who be like, oh, I've heard this as recently as like 3 months ago. It's like, oh, I hate Lars Ulrich of Metallica because he killed Napster. It's like, that was 30 years ago. And you hate that guy because he protected his IP and didn't want to cite stealing their music. Like, okay. By the way, digital music, is it still a thing? Yeah, it still exists, by the way. You can still get all the songs for free on the internet. So anyway,
Suck it, Lars.
Suck it, Lars. Yeah. So, but it's like that. It's like they're still holding a grudge over the whole sphere of music based on something from that long ago. So you're right. It's like people now hate Age of Sigmar because they wanted fantasy, but fantasy died before they started playing it anyway. And so they have not only not the full story, they don't understand what really happened. They also don't understand that Age of Sigmar is a success right now. And so the end times are not, Warhammer Fantasy Battles was not in a successful place when the end times happened. That isn't why the end times didn't just show up out of nowhere and take their game away. So clear the air of that. These rumors, however, the first ones that came out about what the next edition of Age of Sigmar is going to bring were so outlandish because they just parroted almost verbatim what happened to the old world, what happened to Warhammer Fantasy. And they made it sound like this is what's going to happen to Age of Sigmar. Archaon's going to destroy the world. Everybody's going to be killed off, and then they're going to jump forward thousands of years.
They're going to be now on a planet again. The planet's going to look exactly like the fantasy map.
Right.
It's just like, what? It was so crazy. It seems like a trolley sort of post about how like, what happened to you, it's going to happen to me, and we're going to get our thing back. It's like, but you already have the old world back. Why do you? Anyway, doesn't matter. But it was just so wacky and so weird with no context and no details that it was like, there's no way. The thing you're describing is going to happen. Now, since then, we've gotten more details and more rumors, and again, it's all very salty of like what's going to happen. But it seems very weird. It seems very crazy. There was some drama that happened with a famous leaker getting exposed potentially, or being found out, and like we don't know as a community if this was like this person lashing out, or if it was like a death throw, basically, of like, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to throw chaos into the wind kind of thing. But the details of the specifics that are coming out, you can see a whiff of like, okay, I can conceive of this, of how this would happen. Some of the things that were initially said with more context, but I think there's still far too many details in there that still are unbelievable, right? That are either people not knowing, not in the know, trying to put dots together that don't connect, right? Your new plastic Gilliman actually being for Horus Heresy instead of being 40k, for example, if that's going to happen. But lots of weird stuff of like, hey, we've got, in the last 2 years of Age of Sigmar, we've had, 3 armies get major updates, 2 army, 1 army gets a redo kind of thing. But in this next edition, in the next year, we're going to get 5 new factions, 2 new full line revamps.
Right.
And it's just like, there's no way. There's no chance of that happening. 5 brand new armies that don't exist yet being added to the game that are all just humans, and they all mimic the different human factions from the old world, right? It's like, so I don't see it. It's like that's a rumor that's like, no, like
that one's the one that so to I guess give my thoughts along the same stuff. So the famous leaker in question, we don't need to give his name here. I guess it's not worth advertising, but it sounds like it was multiple people using the same account, whatever the story is, I don't care. But they had been very accurate with rumors for a while, and still had provided some of the rumors that we had about this last preview event at Adepticon, told us about the Cog Fort and by name, and gave all these ideas about the Eshin stuff coming out. And while it doesn't end up 100%, it's like they end up correct that this is the release and what it's about. And so, but they were also the one who just all of a sudden went off the rails and posted this big middle finger claiming that the end times are coming to Age of Sigmar. It's basically going to end the same way fantasy did, but then Sigmar's going to kind of be like the Emperor. So we'll have that story too. And it just sounded so ridiculous. Oh, all the characters are dying. None of them are going to carry over. They're going to squat a bunch of armies. And in addition to what you said, they're going to make it one planet where the map looks the same. And there was no way that most people were taking that serious. It seemed just so outrageous and bad even by GW storytelling accounts, because they've had some bad ones, like Eye of Terror campaign, Storm of Chaos campaign. But like, I don't mean the upcoming Eye of Terror. I mean the original one from whatever 2005. But like, this
Newsweek headbutt.
Yeah. This felt worse than all of that. And then there were a bunch of theories about what happened. Like, did GW honeypot this person to catch him? And it's like, no, it just sounds like, I mean, we learned that this account was made by people who don't like Age of Sigmar and haven't. Why they gave so many rumors about it, I don't know. We had that in the past, like in the 2000s, the aughts, when it was like Harry and Hastings who said they don't play Warhammer, but they always were providing weirdly accurate rumors about it. That's what this felt like. And so people were wondering, well, if this character was correct when we go to the Adepticon preview event and the stuff that they said would appear, and the stuff that follows in the weeks after follows, then are these crazy things he or she said about the next edition of Age of Sigmar going to be correct? You brought up an interesting thought, which is that we've also heard a rumor that there are going to be a bunch of end of edition events or campaigns, similar to what we're going through at the end of 10th edition 40k with the 500 Worlds and the Maelstrom and the Eye of Terror and Armageddon. There might be 2, 3, 4 of those types of events at the end of this edition of Age of Sigmar, and maybe some of these stories could be something that happens there.
Or it even could be like, these are possible results of a community event where you report your results at the end to see what happens with a conflict, to determine the fate of a planet, to determine the fate of a city, see who wins and what happens, and then based on what happens, the story changes, right? Like, they've had those, like, that's how the Storm of Chaos was supposed to be. That's how the Eye of Terror originally was supposed to be. Like, some of them, the writing that we're referring to, that we're so like about, was because no matter how it resulted from the fans, they already knew how they wanted it to go.
Yeah.
So they changed the rules mid-campaign of results to be like, well, actually, all that happened before, that 90% win rate of chaos or whatever, really only accounted for such a small percentage of the total battle. The next one, chaos and the Imperium are on even grounds again. Reset it to 50%, and the chaos still wins. They're like, yeah, okay, so they win, but the win was so minor that
and the Imperium, like,
but Imperium
survived and fell back to the next one. So the next one's like 70-30 Imperium. Now go. Right.
Yeah. And so this kind of thing, they really, really forced how they wanted the results to go. Not fun for the community. This one, however, could be just like legitimate. These are things that could happen. Some of it I think are too big to just let the community decide for you. Hey, is the entire 8 realms of the winds of magic that exist right now, are they going to coalesce into one planet or not? Let's let the community decide. I don't know. Something like that, where like, this is an ultimate desperation move at the end of a campaign where like they're losing. And so, like, in order to shut out chaos, we reconvene it back together and create a safe place that was, similar to how Azir was, right? So we had all these different realms, and they're all kind of flat discs with boundaries at the ends, right? That are too unstable. When they turn into pure magic, you can only travel so far. Well, if you stitch all those edges together, and all of a sudden now you can walk from the realm of fire going this way to the realm of metal, where you walk that way and go walk to the realm of life, whatever. Maybe it's the case that like there's no room for the realm of chaos in this self-contained planet now, right? So like, we shut chaos out. Maybe chaos found its way into Azir and it sabotaged heavens. But the ultimate like fail-safe is, if this happens, we trap them here, we lock them here, we self-destruct the heavens realm and save everyone else in the process. But then, damn it, of course, we tried to make that work, but there was already a splinter, right? Skaven has already infiltrated the realm of fire. They've already broken through, and the realm of chaos is already bleeding into this now, already flawed plan. So chaos isn't locked out. Now they can only come from certain directions. Now it's a battle for the planet again. Things like that. Like, I can conceive of something, right? At the very least, undoing it and going back to fantasy is an absurd idea.
Yeah, and I just don't think that's where they're headed.
Yeah.
There's nothing even about like what little of a roadmap we have of Sigmar that points to that. I mean, and then
Right.
the latest rumors we got were someone basically coming out and saying, now calm down. Some of what was said was crazy. Here's really what's, and then it was like, it did seem less absurd. It was like there will be some battle between possibly Sigmar and Archaon, but each side's going to tell a different story. Stormcast and the cities might fracture. And all of that seems believable. Campaigns changing the layout of the map, that could be believable. But then the changing of the name, why would you've heard that, right? It's like Age of Sigmar, the last world. So are they
that would just be Warhammer: The Last World instead of Warhammer: Age of Sigmar,
right?
And it's like what's supposed to accompany that is a big time jump, where it's like, hey, all these books we've done for Black Library in the last year, all these characters we've been developing, all these models that have come out that have been tied to characters in books, and all these character units that are named.
Who are mortal, by the way.
This new ogre faction that's supposed to come out at the end of the edition. Well, they've got 4 named characters in there, and when the new edition changes a couple months later, everything that's named is going away. And we're coming up with a new setting where everything that's mortal dies.
Right.
It's like, why would they possibly do that? Because why would they spend all this time writing stories about, the Hero Master, not the Hero Master, like Callus Toll, and about, Gunnar Brand and all these mortal characters set now in the setting.
And
it's like now they're all dead.
Now you make brand new models like Talia Vedra and like, and like you said, all these named ones coming out. It's like, who are mortal. GW is not in the game of make a brand new sexy model and then kill it a year later. Like, so
unless it's eternal, right? Sure, your demon Primarchs, they live in the realm of chaos. Yep. They live in the chaos. They're eternal. But Space Marines live hundreds of years, thousands of years, even. Like those kinds of characters, it's safe. But like, that's why we're so confused about Yarick. We jumped ahead 200 years in the lore. He is human. Why is he alive?
Right.
That's why they didn't keep Creed around, and they introduced his great granddaughter or something, Ursula, as like a replacement character for him to lead the Imperial Guard. It's because that dude's dead. That dude was old in the setting when he first came out. We've moved on hundreds of years. The dude's way gone.
Yeah.
Unless you're put in stasis, or you're put, you're blipped out from one time to another. And if we do a time jump, you're mortal and you're dead. You're gone.
Yeah.
And so we don't see much of those kinds of characters besides immortal beings, Necrons and elves. Humans are mayflies, right? They show up and they disappear. But there's not a lot of named humans, just throw that out there. But in Age of Sigmar, all of the mortal realms are mortals.
Yeah.
Right. Like besides your elves who can live forever, like orcs, like what about, any of those characters, those named characters who are orcs, or any of the new ogres, like we said, are coming out, or the Age of Sigmar named characters, or there's tons of characters that these are mortals.
We're just going to kill all those new models and make them go away, or change.
There are book series about them, and they're just going to go.
Weird. Or they're going to print entirely new packaging to get rid of the name and call it something else. Like that. That's such a huge waste. And
they repackaged Talia Vedra as something else entirely, as just free guild, high matron on Manticore.
Right.
It's like, why even bother with that? Why do that? I could see a time jump, right? I could see it.
Yep.
The world gets redone. There's some turmoil initially when people realize what had happened. Balance of powers. There's change going on, but then you set the setting up 10 years later, something small like that, where like the initial shock of what happened is worn off, and now we're back to where like life has settled, life is back to normal-ish, and now there are factions vying for power and limited resources, like normal. I could see that. I mean, hell, it wouldn't maybe even take 10 years, a few years before, like, think about any time in your life when you had a big change happen. How long does it take before things feel back to normal again? Months?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't take long for you to settle into changes. I mean, you think about like when a pet dies or, family member or something, it's like, oh,
Or you
I'm never gonna get
move,
over
or
this.
you change
Yeah.
jobs, or yeah.
You move as a kid, you're like, I'm never gonna be back normal. And then it's like, oh wait, a year later, it's like, where was I? Who was that? I mean, not really, but kinda,
Yeah.
like a little bit. Um, but like when we're talking about fiction and settings and lore and stuff, you gotta have continuity there, and just cutting it and be like the end for all of these stories that were in progress. They're all dead now.
Yeah.
Let's move on with new stories. But this new character looks exactly like the other one. That's just not. This other thing looks exactly like that. It's not.
Well, and so this makes me suspect, if that's the right term, that it's still a troll on people hating how the end times went. And so that's what I feel like this rumor was, but they tried to clean it up or tried to soften it to make it seem more credible. So if you think about how the end times went, where you did the like fish eat bigger fish, the big godlike characters did all this stuff. You had all the duels that you wanted to see, and then you wipe out all these characters and move forward, but some of the models carry forward. They just might have a different name and new packaging. So again, this feels like it's like tried to be a more serious version of that same troll. Like they're going to do exactly the same thing to this, a successful game, mind you, where we're gonna kill off all these models, call them something new, but eventually they'll go to Legends, and only the godlike characters will move forward. I just don't buy that's what's going to happen to the setting. I think there will be some big lore shakeup, but I just don't think it's going to look like that.
Right.
I certainly don't think they're going to change how the game plays, because the gameplay itself is an attractive feature of it. You and I learned that pretty early on, when it's like, well, it still feels like Warhammer, but it's so much faster. The rules are more direct, and so there's like fewer questions. And I remember watching the championships get done, and the slowest table was done with 17 minutes left on the clock, when there's like 200 tables of people playing. And it's just a game that goes, I don't know, the gameplay is great, the models are great. I just don't feel like they're going to scrap all of this and come up with a new game, or even call it something different, when AOS is such an acronym people are already using with regularity.
Yeah, it says AOS in all the books that they've already printed.
Yeah.
All the novels and stuff. Like I just don't see it.
No, I just don't. So yeah, it could be we're getting bad information from a troll, and it could also, even though that troll was historically very accurate with rumors, although where's our coolest ended. But where's our Thunderhawk? But like, so it could be that, and it could very well be these end of edition campaigns have some wacky stuff happening in them. And that may be the information we're getting. Because if you consider the lead time, as we understand it from people who worked for Games Workshop, both on the heavy metal team and in the R&D team, they said it's always this like 18-month lead time from when like they decide to put something into production, the heavy metal team paints the stuff, to when the models are actually on the shelves for us as players. And so we could be hearing very early spitball at the wall type story stuff, because these end of campaign things are still 6 months out probably before they get started. So I don't know. It's just hard to buy some of these crazy rumors. I encourage people to take the rumors as lies until we know otherwise. But
yeah.
But what would you want to see if there was a big shakeup?
No, I mean, I always like the idea of new players in the world. Like I like, okay, here's the things I'd want to see kind of from a lore perspective first.
Oh wait, did we touch on that? That was one of the other crazy rumors, was they were going to do 4 more human factions.
Oh, sorry, five new factions. So it was 2 new armies are going to be like basically redone. But that's ogres and dwarves. By the way, dwarves are going to get a new combined arms thing, and ogres are going to get a big gigantic refresh. We know that they're basically new armies. With how many releases are getting done and replacing existing kits, they're basically full army redos. And then it was going to be 4 or 5 new factions, full armies being released to the game. So it was going to be a Cathay faction, which we already have Cathay in the game, or in existence, and that's in Old World. Why would they release Cathay? Weird. They were going to have a Nippon faction, which is Japan, and that would either be human or a Realm of Death aligned human faction, or just straight up a death faction with like samurais. Okay. So one of those three things, depending on who the rumor is coming from.
Weeb's dream, yeah.
Which is weird. And then we would have a Kislev sort of Russian faction, which could either be Kislev or Nordland from fantasy, if you're familiar with it, which are both factions that are similar, but they're different. Where like you still worship the ice, you still worship the great wolf or the great ice bear or whatever kind of thing you're looking at. Nordland and like the Ulrich worshippers and the followers of Kislev, like they're a little similar. Something in there, some sort of Russian / whatever faction.
Yeah.
And then there was going to be so it's a toss up between those two being different things. Some people say they're different things. There's like a straight up Kislev, and then there's a straight up Nordland Ulrich following. They said Tal is what they call it, Taal, which is one of the gods from Old World that was different from Sigmar. They worshipped different things. Who knows? But it was supposed to be like these like 4 human. Was that the 4 of them? 4 different human factions outside of also there being cities of Sigmar still in the game.
And then it was like a gunpowder.
And then there was some kind of other human faction. That's right. That was a more black powder, like shooting chaos faction. So not chaos dwarfs.
Yeah, not Hellsmith.
And then in addition to that, there's going to be like a chivalrous
Bretonnia type,
knight heavy Bretonnia army in addition. So it's just like you're introducing every Old World human faction to Age of Sigmar, like bullshit.
By the way, most of whom never got models in Warhammer Fantasy when they were outside of Bretonnia. So yeah,
none of them did. None of those factions had. I mean, there were some Teutonic knights and some warrior priests that were from Nordland, from old fantasy.
Right.
That's it. But there was no Kislev. There was no Nippon. There was no Cathay. Cathay came out in Old World much later. Yeah. There was no like chaos shooting army. Bretonnia was there obviously, but even the Bretonnia models like could have used significantly more expansion from that.
Yeah, and so these fantasy ripoffs are going to be in Age of Sigmar, the game that the fantasy players hate on principle. So I just, that is hard for me to believe any of it, even though they came up with names and places and whatever.
I can come up with names and places just by fucking asking ChatGPT to come up with new human factions for fantasy for me.
Yeah,
I could whip up weird names like that. Like, I don't know.
If I were to think there's any nugget of truth to any of that, which for one, if you think of their release schedule in the history of ever, there's no way they're going to make what would amount to 6 full lines of models for factions for one game in one
right
edition.
After 2 massive army refreshes.
Yeah, it's just not happening. And so that already logistically it's not happening. 2, if we were to give some nugget of truth, it could be the misplaced identity, like is a new Guilliman going to be in 30K or the Scouring or 40K or whatever. It could be that where people are seeing artwork or concepts for DLC for Total War Warhammer.
Or here's another idea. Remember there was a game called Warcry?
There was also a game called Warcry.
There was a game called Warcry that kind of slowly disappeared. They didn't say it was not being continued. They just stopped talking about it. But essentially what Warcry did was introduce all kinds of wacky new idea war bands to the game that they eventually introduced most of them into the game proper. But Spearhead as a game is one that is taking off and is very popular. It's a self-contained, as we said, self-contained kind of balanced system around smaller armies. These smaller armies could absolutely be themed around any of those 6 things we talked about.
Yep.
There might be a specific Spearhead that is a human warband, Cathay, Chinese theme, whatever, Nippon themed, whatever themed thing that is Spearhead exclusive. Doesn't have rules in Age of Sigmar. Maybe it's a spearhead army, and that's all that they release for that faction. Oh, there's an undead like samurai spearhead army that they come out with. Okay, but then that doesn't mean there's going to be an army for it. Doesn't mean it's going to be integrated into Age of Sigmar, into one of the existing factions. Like maybe they're going to try something new with Spearhead and be like, hey, here's 4 new armies in Spearhead that are not from armies in Age of Sigmar. You have to,
which of course would make the fans say, now I want an army of this, right? But so it's interesting you bring up Warcry. So any number of possibilities. So one thing that we didn't get, well, you're right. You could go into an AI bot and get crazy names for factions and places. One thing that the rumor didn't have was specifics on models. And that's very early in their design phase, they're being GW. And so if they didn't see that, I don't buy it. 2, maybe there were actually Warcry warbands that were themed like this.
Yep.
That got designed, maybe even some of them printed, and then with Warcry disappearing from discussion and a release schedule, these things maybe are just sitting somewhere.
Or maybe some idiots saw some actually existing Warcry warbands, and didn't realize they existed because they quietly released at the end, and they're like, wow, these are new things. Because I can think of a bunch of stuff that's kind of like that. The Horns of Hashut Warcry warband had guns and bombs and grenades, and they were a chaos faction. That seems like a black powder chaos faction to me.
You had the samurai,
or the literal samurai vampires with the Yaokai leader. Like that existed, and maybe you didn't realize that ever existed. And then you see that for the first time, you're like, whoa, this is cool. You're like, you're right. It is cool. And it was cool when it released 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. People don't have all the information.
We've seen people be like, this new model's coming out. And people are like, no, that's a thing. Or they mistake an identity, or they even get the count wrong. Like, I think it's possible that single units, whether existing or were in the works for something, could be what people saw as far as this Cathay theme, Nippon theme, whatever, Bretonian theme, and it might have been for anything else. Who knows? Even the name Warhammer: The Last World. Maybe there's going to be some. Maybe that isn't the name. Maybe that's a working title. Maybe there's going to be a relaunch of Warcry. Maybe that's what they're going to try it again in a different way.
And there's a new box set board game like Silver Tower
or Darkwater.
Who knows?
Yep.
Who knows?
And
I will say it is very interesting though, because we mentioned new warbands and Warcry. There, the pre-order for next week is that Cities of Sigmar versus Skaven box. With those 2 armies. I will say that all of the stuff on the Cities of Sigmar site is brand new.
Okay.
Not so again, lending credence to the fact that we could get Spearhead specific warbands.
Yeah.
Every model in this Spearhead is new. In the Skaven one, all but 1 model are brand new models.
Yeah, so and 2 of those are named characters, right? Jorvin Keel and Thexa the Ash Panther.
That's a duo. That's the guy and his cat.
Okay, yeah.
The Ash Panther is his cat, and then there is Deathmaster Crixit, which is a named Deathmaster for Skaven.
And they'll probably have Age of Sigmar rules, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure they will. And then there's a normal Deathmaster, which is reused. That's the only model in the entire thing is the Deathmaster Skaven model that released kind of on its own a while back.
Well, and it's interesting is that that's another expansion to Cities of Sigmar, who are getting greatly expanded by the upcoming release. So it's cool to see that box set confirmed. But again, that rumor monger who started this whole fiasco did tell us about this box set some time ago. And so that's why people are like, well, could it be true? It's like the difference is when this character gave us information about something coming out, that's what it was information. Or like a John the Baptist best description you can come up with type thing, describing locusts or whatever. And so it's like, so they would be like, well, I saw this thing that looked like Skaven, da-da-da-da. And but they left out their opinions. They left out their hatred for the setting of the game. And the difference is these outlandish ideas about what's supposed to come to AOS 5 sound completely different, like a different voice even.
Yeah.
And so I think you touched on something that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet, that these things could be existing or never released things for Warcry or even Spearhead that were sitting around, and people are like, oh, it's entirely new factions coming out because they're probably not in packaging of any kind yet or something. And so
there's these really cool guys where there's like they're wielding all these flaming weapons and throwing these pots of like fire. That was a Warcry warband. Like that kind of thing. It's like there's this really cool like kind of mirage-y kind of humans that have these big headdresses and these like katanas and stuff. Oh, you mean a Warcry warband?
That was a Warcry.
Like there's that kind of stuff. Like there's all kinds of stuff that people forget were released for Warcry that like they've discontinued and they're not on the store anymore. Like Warcry has been expunged basically, and like you forget they existed, and you see them and like, whoa, that's cool. Why didn't they ever release that? And like they did.
Well, and if the person or persons who allegedly saw this or heard about it were already people who didn't like the setting, they're probably going to be aware even less so of Warcry. And so I don't know. That could very well be what it is, and it ends up nothing even close to that. Or again, there's enough lead time that GW can pivot if this stuff leaked out and they're like, oh, the community seems unhappy. What I think is going to happen, we're not going to lose our game. I don't think that's going away because it's successful. We're not going to lose these models and the style with which they're made because that's successful. I just think we might see a big lore shakeup at most. But I could see how that would worry you. Like, yeah, if all of a sudden all these named characters you have released in the last year are just going to, that's a tough one for me to accept. They don't get rid of new models too frequently. Like,
yeah. And I don't think in Age of Sigmar they've ever really done a time jump either.
Not like that.
It's always been kind of like a continuous story. It's maybe a few years, between, but like never okay, everyone's dead. Everyone who exists now is new.
Yeah, reset.
Why?
You do that when something's not working, but again, it seems to be working. So it's just, I don't know. So there's just a lot about it that doesn't smell right, but at the same time, it's been hard to get good rumors since that account shut down. Yep. So now nobody really knows what's coming.
Very, very accurate. And again, we're kind of off-road map at this point too, because we know more cities and stuff is coming, and then this is next week. I don't think we ever got a roadmap for when the Cog Fort's coming out, which I assume will be right after this next release, because some of that stuff that's coming out new will be released on its own, right? Like pretty much all of it. And so we're gonna get this box set where you get it first, and then after that, then you get your Ogre Warhawks, whatever, or your Gate Gargans plus all the other stuff that's supposed to be coming. Cog Fort. I've come up with so many ideas for Cog Forts, by the way, that are themed around specific armies, because the Regiment of Renowned Cog Fort can be taken for any army.
Yep.
And so you can do it if you want to, just add a Cog Fort to an army, but I've been doodling and drawing my own kit bashed like Cog Fort equivalents for every single army in the game. What would I come up with? And most of them don't even use the Cog Fort kit. It's like they're all very kind of unique. I think a Skaven one would make sense to be. But I think that technology.
It's funny is that model just ended up low key such a win.
Yeah,
I mean it's a risk. It technologically, as far as the technology believability goes, it's so wacky, and I would have thought it was going to be a big risk and it was going to be memed on, and really everybody's like, nope, we're buying one. Like, and it's going to be like a $200 kit, or whatever, but it's or close, whatever the biggest kits are now. But that's just it. The fact every army can take it, the fact that you could easily convert it to 40K if you wanted. Like
I'd seen way more of people actually wanting to use it for Age of Sigmar than
I know.
Oh, this would be a great stand-in for whatever army in 40K. But I did see someone say like, well, who's going to be converting this into a Defiler? Who's going to be converting this into a feudal world themed like Imperial Knight?
Yeah,
like, who's going to do
Mechanic Knight or something?
That kind of stuff.
But that's just it. Is I think that kit's going to be one of those that a ton of people buy, even though that, you know, so I think it was a bit of a risk, but it's going to be a huge payoff for them.
Sure.
Which again, are they going to invalidate that next edition? So I don't know. I think I know a lot more about my next meal than I do about what GW is up to.
Yeah, I could definitely stand to get something in me. I'm pretty hungry.
Yeah.
Something smells good. So let's sit on that and digest that for a little bit and see if anything else comes out. In the meantime, let's eat.
Let's eat.